All right, I think we'll start. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for bearing with us on the last day on a Friday morning. So we're talking today about getting support from your chair, tips and tricks for getting institutional backing for education research in emergency medicine. And I have a very distinguished panel here. I'm sure you guys know some of these people. We will introduce ourselves a little bit later, more in depth. And we have nothing to disclose. I'm extremely excited that this slide came out the right way because it wasn't on the previous, so that's good. That's a good start for all of us. All right, so objectives for today. We will identify some of the things that we can ask for as far as support that are not money and that are not just buy down, because really those are the things that usually we want to get, but when we come to the negotiation table, sometimes those are not the easiest to get. So what other things can we ask for? What other things can our department chairs give us and offer us that would be very helpful? So we'll talk about strategies for garnering that support for us as the researchers, and we'll talk about strategies for leadership for allocating the support. And without further ado, we'll move on to our first presenter, Dr. Golsan.
This is very complicated. All right, let's see. So I don't need both, I guess. There we go. All right. So basically what we wanted to talk a little bit about is, as Alina said, what other things can you ask for and what are some of the barriers for getting what you need? And I think one of the big things that we've come to recognize, Alina and I guess we'll do the proper intros later, but we're both at Yale, which is a very research-heavy institution. But part of it is that the medical education research really is different in terms of what we do, and so the recognition can be really challenging to make sure that the infrastructure that we have can also be put to use for us, just because we use very different methodologies. A lot of times, so we've gone to a couple of sessions that they have for developing the research concepts that people have, and we've just found that people don't really understand what we're doing in terms of medical education research. And obviously, if people don't understand, it's really hard to sell it. So different methodologies, as we mentioned. We're also very much dependent on volunteers or participants. It's a lot of time and effort put in by both the faculty, by the residents that I'm sure you've all had the experience of sort of trying to sell a resident on a survey study or some procedure study or whatever, and having people come in to do that, it's a really very much time-intensive thing for us. Whereas some of the clinical research, for example, if you have an RA that's funded, it's not necessarily faculty time or resident time. And so having that investment in us ourselves is a little bit different in terms of where we're looking to put that time and effort. Also, obviously, smaller studies. So smaller studies sometimes take more convincing. It sounds like it might be easier, but even recruitment for that can be pretty challenging. So having the faculty be able to explain, or you guys, I guess, being able to explain what it is that you're doing is really important to be able to sell that to your chair or whoever's going to provide you funding. And especially in this day and age, but just in general, limited funding is a reality, I think, for all of us. And that's true for any kind of research, but certainly for education research, it's even more limited. So there's really not a lot of sources if you look out there. Certainly there's some sort of seed grants, small grants that you can look for. SAEM obviously has some education grants, but certainly in terms of the bigger picture overall, I think research funding for education is much more limited. And same thing, again, selling that to your chair, if they in particular, most chairs are not, I guess, educators. In the bigger picture, yes, but they're not usually coming from an education background. And certainly even at bigger institutions where they might be very research heavy and less administrative, there's still going to be people that are not as familiar with what we do. And so again, the sales pitch is what we'll talk a little bit about. I don't know who's...
Okay. Perfect. And I think people can people hear me even if it's not in the microphone? Okay, excellent. Yeah. So support, not just monetary. So before we talk into what types of support we could ask for, it's important to kind of have alignment with both your department and then also with your health system. So having a clear idea of what your mission and vision is for education and research in your department, and then having a clear idea for what your chair's mission and vision is for the department. So this is ChatGPT's version of a couple vision statements for education, but you can see better care through cutting edge education. Would your chair be interested in something that's providing better care? Absolutely. National leaders in education and healthcare outcomes. Are they interested in your department being national leaders and interested in healthcare outcomes? Yes. So finding where what you want to do can align with your chair. Now, once you have that alignment, there's a couple different ways you can go from point A to point B. You know where you are, you know where you want to go. So the first one is perfect alignment. Your chair is like, yes, let me write you a check, here is the money. That never happens. If it happens for any of you guys, please let me know. I'd love to know your secrets. What's more likely is your chair's like, yeah, I get it. We're both going in the same direction, but we need to take the scenic route, not the direct route. And there's a lot of pit stops we have to make on the way based on the interests of the health system, the interests of the dean, what he's being told his or her priorities should be in the department. And so you have to figure out, can the pit stops they have to work on their scenic view align with what you have? So where is there alignment that you can share resources and share funding? And then the last thing is, yes, I like where you're going, but we need to take the route that has no tolls. In other words, I will support everything you want to do as long as at the end of the day, the budget doesn't change, the money isn't increasing. And so we have to be a little creative when we're thinking about this. So what I always get told when I meet my chair and my COO, and even frankly the med school, is education is not revenue generating. And while that's true, we talked about how the grants are a little bit less, we're not getting these huge NIH grants. There is an opportunity for cost savings. And so when you're looking at that, I think looking at how you can save the department money in certain areas, again, where it aligns with the vision, and then not just saying, yes, we're going to save that money, but now we're saving that money, can part of that then be redirected to different educational initiatives? So what are some types of things that you can ask for? So admin support. If you already have admins working on other research projects, can they devote a little bit of their time for you? It's not getting time for your buy down, but maybe it's offloading some of the work so you can reinvest your time in other areas. Same thing with research assistants, coordinators, data analysts. Can some of your time be packaged into your incentive packages, RVUs, EVUs? Can you think about educational research in a similar way that the department looks at traditional research? Grant matching. So I've had success not necessarily getting the grants, but getting my chair to agree to providing some support if I'm going to get this grant or some kind of matching. And this is where knowing where your department is spending the money is helpful, because if they're already doing it for their research team, it's a little hard for your chair to say, well, I'll do it for researchers and not for you. So I think you can negotiate some of that. Having teaching fellows, so we have med ed scholarship fellows at Penn, and that helps one with offloading some of the tasks, but then also as a method for cost savings, and then software subscriptions. And I just want to add in about collaboration. So we talked about how we could do it in the department, but also how can you do it in a broader scale? So can you collaborate with other departments, share data analysts, share research assistants, share software? So I would encourage you to look at other departments, look at the School of Medicine, and look at the health system. What are they currently paying for, and where can you kind of tag on? And then who am I passing this to next? Excellent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we mentioned a few of these already, but I think it's important to highlight this. Ultimately, sometimes you have to get into the head of the boss, right? Figure out how is the boss thinking about this, because I'm going to be asking the boss for these resources that I want. And I interviewed a lot of chairs and directors of research for this, and I got a lot of the same themes back. These are the things that people have reported to me are important in their decision making on what to support. And by support, I don't just mean, oh yeah, that sounds good. I mean support, like give you things, right? So you want things. Mission is important. So if you don't have a mission in your department, well, maybe you do and you don't know what it is. Maybe the chair is not sharing the mission. So find out what the mission is supposed to be and try to find a way, again, as we mentioned before, of aligning your project, your personal goals with the mission of the department. Shared resources are important. So find things that already exist. Maybe other groups are using those things. It could be a stats person. It could be a person who helps writing grant applications. It could be almost anything. And see if there's a way that you can leverage those resources. So that requires you to identify what resources exist in your department, which may mean you have to learn a little more about the people around you and what's going on in the department, but it benefits you at the end. Experience mix is important. I think most chairs feel that you don't want to get too top heavy, and you don't want to have too many newbies at the same time. So you're trying to mix various levels of experience in research specifically, or research methodologies, And so you want to have some senior researchers, probably who are pulling most of the money in, and you want to have junior researchers who are going to replace those people when they get older. And so if you're one of those junior people, that could be a sales pitch you could use. Is, well, what's going to happen in 10 years? You're going to need people to carry the torch. And so you could be that person. And so you want to try to inspire this idea in the chair or whoever's making the decision that I might be the next generation of what you need to keep this department going, and that you're adding to the experience mix. Career enhancing is really the point of, how will this project that you want to do change your life as the investigator, as the person doing the project? How will it make your career better? So you're bringing it back to your career specific to you, as well as these other elements relating to the larger department. New versus add-on, and by this it means, is this something that you're already doing, right? Is this a direction you're already heading? A lot of times the chair wants to see consistency or a clear vision, a clear direction for you in your career, so they don't want to fund like 20 disparate projects that are unrelated to each other. They want to see that you have a clear goal and vision for your career. And so if you can show that this is not entirely new, but this is how it adds on or adds value or adds experience to my already previously established career choice and trajectory, that's valuable for you. Does it build on prior results? Is this something that is advancing something you've already learned? Because that could be a valuable tool to convince someone to finance that. And by the way, these tips would work with a lot of other funders too, not just your chair, okay? When you're applying for grants, these things are good to mention. Collaborative, we mentioned the value of collaboration, and by that it means really working with other departments, but also potentially working with other staff within your department. And visibility, so how will this project raise the visibility of your department? How will you, being the PI of this funded study that you're going to win at and you're going to succeed, how will that make the department look good, right? And that's important to most chairs, if not all. And then future funding, it's the seed money idea, right? So how are you going to expand and build on this project, and how is this going to lead to the next thing that you're going to do? And it's always good if you can say the next thing is going to be funded, and that this is a way you can help me get to the funding. They love that. So I would suggest consider that. Like, again, this goes back to what is the trajectory of your career? Where are you heading? If you don't know, find out, and then go ask for the things that you need, because that's a good way to convince them that you need these things to develop in the way you need to develop. So those are my comments. I think now we're into some questions, question time. So I'll hand it over.
All right, so the first part of the panel, we'll just go through each of us and introduce ourselves, our name and where we're from, and kind of what kind of department you're at and what kind of education research are you involved in. So I'll start first. I'm Alina Tsirolnik. I'm one of the APDs at Yale, together with Katja Goldflam, who is my co-APD. And we have a pretty large residency. We have 19 residents per class, and a pretty large department with about 80 faculty. Most of our faculty are involved in research in one way or another, and we have a very substantial research section, including people who just do research, not clinically working. So you might think that that makes it much easier. It actually, one of the questions will be, is it easier or harder? But yeah, that's a little bit about myself. Mike.
Okay, next, so Michael Gallium, I'm Vice Chair of Research in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Washington, Chicago. We went from a predominantly community-type functioning and academic medical center just over a decade ago to building a residency program, and then since then going from initially unfunded research predominant to a giant research architecture with millions of dollars in funding and a team of CRCs. So I've seen all three levels of that, and I've been part of all three levels of that. So I'm hoping I can have my lens from having been on the side of both with almost no resources to now being in a state with solid resources. And yeah.
James Paxton, Wayne State University. We do a lot of clinical research, one of the larger clinical research divisions in the country for EM. But we're trying to build more medical education research, and that's an important part of our strategy and our plan for going forward. So I think people have done a good job of convincing my chair that it's important and that it's a high priority.
Morning. Asit Mishra, Assistant Professor, Emergency Medicine, University of Miami, Miller School of Medicine. Background is emergency medicine and simulation. So I come from a background where you try to get money from medical education, and then again in the simulation. So that's it. You have to justify why you need more money than other collaborative initiatives. But yeah, we do have fundings available from our state. We do a lot of medical research and curriculum development for the state. That's one way of getting some money. And although that money goes back to the chair, and then we have to still ask them to give it back to us.
So I'm Kathy Goldflam. I'm also Associate Residency Director with Alina and Associate Professor at Yale. And I guess we've also seen a pretty big development over the last now almost 15 years at Yale, which is kind of crazy. But I think, and Mike obviously is one of the helpful pioneers in all this, but I think just in general, medical education research really has just taken off tremendously over the last decade that I've seen. And so I think there is now a lot more funding out there, a lot more respect for that kind of work. And it's certainly something that we've seen in the department as well. So certainly one other source to just think about is also if you were at a medical school where anyone needs to do research or write a thesis or wants to get promoted or wants to get into residency, for example, obviously the medical students are often sort of like a nice free resource as well. So just something additional to consider that I realized we didn't mention. So.
That's a great point. I'm Susanna Sao. I'm Vice Chair of Education at Penn here in Philly, Professor of Emergency Medicine. And, along with our med-ed research, we have about 7 different fellowships, 2 ACGME, the rest non-ACGME. There's a significant amount of med-ed research that occurs across the fellowships. And I'm really looking at also how we can align our med-ed research with the School of Medicine and the health system so that we're not operating in silos anymore.
I think we'll start off with the first question for the panel is give an example or two of things that you have asked for and received from your chair, from your department, that does not include buy down and or actual money, and that you found very helpful.
So in the current climate right now, it's probably a particularly salient question because there's only so much money and there's not a lot of new money coming in to say, okay, let's go off this. So how do we get strategic? Because everything you ask for, you're taking away from something else. The pot's only so big, so what do we pull from? A couple of things I found really helpful. So I'm going to set this question back and say the first thing is, and Jim brought up a good point about collaboration is a lot of, the biomedical, not traditionally considered educational grants actually really benefit from an educational lens. So there's ways you can jump onto someone else's funding and provide them support. Simulation is an excellent example of where you can help with implementation science, you can help with the actual ability to run the study successfully because you've simulated in this environment. And that brings in funding that was already there, but now can be reallocated towards your educational efforts. I think figuring out where there's gaps, because if you hire a statistician for a year, you hire a statistician for a year, but if you actually don't need them right now, that's an available person that's already funded, it can't be used, how can you bring them in? So the other one is thinking through, who can you borrow time from that has the time available? You can be really strategic with grants if you have them 95% of a grant and 5% free, because you have a little wiggle room with that 5%. And so trying to think through how can you use someone's available times from that is another one. The third one is as you're recruiting in faculty, make sure you have the chairs or vice chairs or whoever's deciding that's ear of saying, I need this. So, I'll say as someone who runs our vice chair, I'm vice chair of research, I'm also the division director. When we pull in ultrasound faculty, and when the spot opens up, I have my chair's ear to say, I'm looking for an ultrasound researcher. And now I'm able to still pull an ultrasound faculty I want, but I can swing them towards research, and it feeds 2 needs. And same thing for medical education is, there's lots of educators, but there's a smaller cadre of education researchers, so when the spot opens up, I really like an education researcher. And then you can get someone that will come in and bring that expertise. So think of ways you can expand and collaborate and build that. Do things that don't cost money, you're just tailoring your needs.
Yeah, that's good. The question was something that we've gotten from our boss that I wasn't right on. Stat support. So we teamed up on him along with the clinical research team and said, we've been needing this for a while. It's a huge obstacle for learners to get published in any kind of research because they're not usually well versed with research methodology. And so our institution, our university had a biomedical statistical division, and so they basically gave us credits that we could use with this other biostat support group that was not EM, it's on the EM group, but our department agreed that they would fund a certain number of hours of consultation time with this biostats team, and it worked out great. And so that was something, I mean, it's not free, but it was certainly something that we didn't have before, and it definitely makes it easier for our learners and our faculty to publish, because those people could really get into it and tell you what's right and wrong with your study, with your research.
And kind of jumping on that, any other creative ways of getting stats support that you've found helpful that is not just paying or outsourcing the statistics to somewhere where you would have to spend money on that? Any other hints or tips that the panel might have for finding statistics help?
Finding friendly people in other departments who have masters in biostats or PhDs in biostats and just want to help out and be friendly and don't need money. You can take them to dinner.
Yeah, I found, you know, for us, our pharmacists, we have a series of pharma MDs, they go through training, so we have a bunch of pharma MDs that do statistics for us, and we've built that cadre out. The other avenue I found is that sometimes you have faculty that are just looking for a niche, and they don't have a good clinical niche. And if you can start to train them up, and maybe that's an ask of the chair to support masters or some courses for them, or just to start training them up in that could be their niche. They'll walk away with more papers than anyone else in the department because they're the statistical expert now. And they can actually build a really impressive career being the statistician expert. And so sometimes finding that person might want to take that role on. It doesn't always have to be necessarily a PhD, because a lot of the stats is just, I need someone that has the time and capacity to do, you know, mid-level stats.
Just to piggyback on what Mike said, education research stats is not that crazy if you just go into it. And one of the things that we found is just develop someone. We have developed our own, and we were giving money to the stat core, and we found that we have to train them more because to understand education research. So we developed our own thing, and now among 3 or 4 of us, we can just do it. So think about that.
So I think last question for the group is, and I think we have a pretty varied group of panelists. When you are in an institution that is research-heavy academic versus when you are in a smaller institution that's more community-based, but you want to do research there, talk about the experience and like which one do you think is harder, easier? What are the pros of being one of the fewest researchers in your institution?
I'll hand this off real quick because we're not one of the smaller institutions, but I will say that actually in some ways I found it almost more challenging to be at a bigger place where again the sights are set so high for really big studies. I mean, Yale is incredibly proliferative, and so to sort of be recognized or to get the understanding of the chair and the department that even the small stuff really matters, I think it's just, again, the perspective is so different, and so you would have to work a little bit harder in terms of convincing people. But again, getting multi-institutional stuff, you know, different departments working together, I think you can fund or share your resources, I guess, in that regard, and then build something a little bit larger that's also going to be more easily recognized. So. That was your question.
I guess about so and it absolutely is going to have a different environment to each, and there's pros and cons. There's no perfect solution. When you have a institution that has a lot of infrastructure, a lot of people, it means you have the support in place, you have collaborators, you have ideas, you have easier pathways sometimes to bigger funding because you have somebody you can tag on that has that track record they want to see. But you're also a small fish in a giant pond, and so your ability to stand out and leverage that is harder. When you're the big fish in a small pond, you have more leverage, but you have less support. And so each one, you're going to tailor it differently. If I'm in an institution where I have a bunch of collaborators around me, I'm going to leverage their expertise locally and figure out how we can collaborate and say, all right, now he's something that hits multiple different things that are missional out of the department. If I'm in a spot where I am looking at something where I'm, you know, the major researcher in my institution, I'm leveraging that for local resources, but then I'm reaching out. And that's how it went for me when I started out, and I was probably the sole researcher for a while, or one of the sole researchers. I was reaching out and getting most of my collaborations, and a lot of my initial studies that got funded were in collaboration with other sites because we just didn't have enough infrastructure to run it so well. And so kind of figure out what areas and strengths you have at your institution and play to those strengths, and then build it to the level where you want to be.
Yeah, I don't think you can unilaterally say it's easier or harder and big or small. I think it really just boils down to available resources, and small places might have great resources and large places might have no available resources for you. So probably depends a lot more on circumstance than on the location of your research effort. I think we're going to be over time. Other questions from the audience before we move on to our next sessions?
Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.